You tap google.com and press enter. That's it. That's all you do. And within a fraction of a second, a web page appears. It feels instant. It feels simple. It feels like nothing happened at all. Something did happen. Something genuinely complex, distributed across the entire planet, involving service you've never heard of, protocols designed decades ago, and a hierarchy of authority that underpins every single website you've ever visited. And almost none of it is visible to you. Here's the thing that makes this interesting. Your computer has absolutely no idea what google.com means. None. Zero. A computer does think in names. It does not think in words. The computer thinks in numbers. Specifically, it thinks in IP addresses, sequences of numbers that identify machines on the network, something like 142.250.74.46. That's a real address for one of Google's servers. That's the kind of thing your computer actually needs. But you didn't type that. You typed google.com. You typed a human word. And so, before your browser can do anything, before it can request a single byte of a web page, it has to solve a translation problem. It has to convert a name into a number. That translation process has a name. It's called DNS, the domain name system. And the story of how it works is generally one of the more elegant pieces of engineering that makes the modern internet possible. Let's follow a single request. Your request, right now, the next time you type a website name and press enter. Let's follow it all the way down. Before DNS existed, the internet was small enough that this problem had a crude but workable solution. In the early days of what would eventually become the internet, there was a file, just a plain text file called HOSTS.TXT, maintained by a single organization at the Stanford Research Institute. This file was essentially a handwritten list. This name goes to this number, and that name goes to that number. Every machine on the network that needed to know how to find another machine would download a copy of this file and consult it locally. For a network over a few hundred machines, this was fine. Clunky, but fine. Someone would update the master copy, everyone else would sync their copies, and the system would work. Then the network grew, a lot. By the early 1980s, this approach was collapsing under its own weight. The file was getting larger and harder to manage. Conflicts were appearing. Two different people trying to name their machine the same thing, and the fundamental problem was obvious. You cannot have one organization manually maintaining a list of global network with millions, eventually billions of participants. So in 1983, a computer scientist named Paul Monkapetris designed something new, a system that was distributed by nature, a system that could delegate responsibility, a system that could scale with the internet. No matter how large the internet became, he called it the domain name system. What Monkapetris designed wasn't just a big phone book. It was something more like a hierarchy, a tree structure, where different levels of the tree are responsible for different parts of the name. And crucially, no single organization has to know everything. Each part of the tree only has to know its own piece. That decision, distributed, hierarchical, delegated, is why DNS still works today. Decades later, at the scale Monkapetris himself probably couldn't fully imagine. So what actually happens when you type a website name? The answer is not one thing, it's a sequence of things, each one checking a different layer of memory, each one designed to answer the question as quickly as possible and only escalates to a more distant system if it has to. Think of it as a series of questions your computer asks before it reaches out to the wider world. And at each stage, if the answer is known locally, the process stops. No need to go further. The first question happens entirely within your browser. Your browser maintains its own DNS cache. A cache is just a temporary storage of recent answers. If you visited google.com 10 minutes ago, your browser almost certainly still remembers the IP address it got back then. It stores that answer. So when you type google.com again, it doesn't start the whole resolution process. So it looks in its own memory, finds the answer, and you're done before the request even leaves your browser. This is a fundamental design principle in computing. If you've done work before, store the result so you don't have to do it again. It's called caching, and it appears at every level of DNS. We'll come back to it repeatedly because understanding caching is understanding why DNS performs as well as it does. If the browser cache doesn't have the answer, maybe you haven't visited that site in a while, or you're on a different browser, or the cache was cleared. The request moves to the next layer, your operating system. Every operating system, Windows, macOS, Linux, the software running your phone, maintains its own DNS cache, separate from any individual browser. So even Firefox doesn't remember the answer. Your operating system it sits slightly further from you, but it still counts as local. No network traffic required, just a check in memory. And there's something else your operating system checks before it goes to the network, a file called the host file. This is, in a strange way, a direct descendant of that original HOSTS.TXT from the 1980s. Every modern operating system has one. It's a plain text file where a human can manually define name to address mappings. Most of the time it only has a handful of entries, but if your domain is in there, that answer wins. It overrides everything else, including what DNS would have told you. Network administrators sometimes use this for internal systems. Security researchers sometimes use it to block known malicious domains. It's a small file, easy to overlook, but it sits right at the beginning of the DNS resolution process. If neither the browser cache, nor the OS cache, nor the host file has the answer, the request moves outside your machine. The next stop is your router. Your home router or office network router also maintains the DNS cache. It sees every DNS query that passes through it from every device on the network. So if your roommate visited the website an hour ago and your router already knows that IP address, it can answer your question directly without sending anything further up the chain. Your router is sitting there quietly accumulating answers to questions your household has asked before, ready to serve them up instantly. If the router doesn't know either, the request travels further, out of your local network entirely, and into the hands of what's called a recursive resolver. A recursive resolver is the engine at the heart of DNS. It's the system that, when nobody in your local environment knows the answer, actually goes out and finds it. When your device is configured to use a specific DNS server, and it is always configured to use one, either automatically or manually, that server is typically a recursive resolver. Your ISP, your internet service provider, almost certainly runs one. It's part of the service they provide. When you connect to the internet through your ISP, one of the things they hand you is the address of their DNS resolver, so that all your domain lookups get processed through their infrastructure. But you might also be using a different resolver, Cloudflare. It runs on 1.1.1.1, a deliberately memorable address. Google runs at 8.8.8.8. Many companies and technical minds that individuals configure their devices to use one of these instead of their ISP's default. We'll get to why that choice matters. So what does a recursive resolver actually do? It does what its name suggests. It resolves names recursively by working through the hierarchy of DNS from the top down. Here's the scenario. Your recursive resolver gets you the question, what's the IP address for google.com? It checks if it's own cache first. Recursive resolvers handle enormous volumes of keys, and their caches are substantial. A popular resolver might already have the answer for google.com cached because thousands of other people asked the same question recently. But let's say the cache is cold. The resolver generally doesn't know. Now it has to do the actual work. And this is where DNS reveals its architecture. The resolver needs to work through the name from the right to the left. Google.com has two meaningful parts. .com is a top-level domain, and Google is the specific domain within that. To find the authoritative answer for Google.com, the resolver needs to know who is responsible for .com. And to find out who is responsible for .com, it needs to go to the very top of the hierarchy. The top of the hierarchy is called the root. In DNS, the root is represented by a single dot, a dot that normally isn't written, but it's conceptually always there, at the end of every domain name. Google.com is really Google.com, with that invisible trailing dot representing the root. The root zone is maintained by a group of servers, called root name servers. And here the scale becomes striking. There are 13 logical root name server addresses. There's 13 root server identities labeled A through M for the entire global internet. It might sound shockingly small. It is. And there is a reason for it. The original DNS protocol in the 1980s had constraints on the size of certain DNS packets, and 13 authorities was the maximum that could fit cleanly in that original design. But here's the important nuance. Those 13 logical identities are not 13 physical machines. Far from it. Through a technique called Anycast, routing each of those 13 addresses is served by many physical machines distributed around the world. The letter J, root server, for example, is actually hundreds of physical machines in dozens of countries. When your resolver carries the J root, it reaches the nearest physical instance of that server, wherever in the world it happens to be. As of today, there are over 1,000 physical root server instances worldwide. So while 13 is the right answer to how many root server identities exist, it would be misleading to think the entire Internet Foundation rests on 13 boxes in a few data centers. The resolver knows the addresses of all 13 root server identities. This knowledge is hard-coded. It's part of the resolver's configuration, a small file called the root hints file that lists where to find the root. This is the starting point. This is ground zero for every DNS lookup that isn't answered by a cache. So the resolver reaches out to a root server and asks, I'm looking for Google.com. Where do I go? The root server doesn't know the answer. It doesn't need to. Its job is simple and more elegant than that. It knows who is responsible for .com. It knows the addresses of the TLD servers, the top-level domain servers that manages the .com namespace. So it says, I don't know the answer, but here are the servers who are responsible for .com. Who ask them. Next, in part 2, TLD servers, top-level domain server.